Well, let's hope this works. So, indeed, I am the Ene-Reet Soovik from Estonian. Glad to be here. And to start with, I'm just pointing out two articles that I have contributed to that kind of vaguely constitute the background or the backstory of this paper. So these might kind of somehow justify my presence here, as I am not a literary historian. I'm not even a trained specialist in Estonian literature. So it's kind of representing someone I'm not, with all those eminent specialists who have gathered here. And what I'm also doing here, adding a quote from the biosemioticien Kalevi Kull, just to remind us that, well, the human involvement with nature is a very multi-layered affair. And it is mostly, well, nature 3 that I have highlighted in this, well, semiotic scheme that we as scholars of culture and literature are engaged with. Now, as to these articles, in one of them, we, together with the eco-critic Kadri Tüür, noticed that involvement with wetlands would be one of the possible common points in the, well, unfortunately still rather the patchy corpus of Baltic eco-criticism. And in the other, we, with another colleague, a geographer, observed the emergence of the social perception of the mire. And now I'm actually using the terms such as the mire or the bog or the swamp interchangeably in this presentation, although they are actually, strictly speaking, terms that have different meanings in geographers' terminology. So the social perception of the mire reflected in literary fiction, and its involvement then from a state of virtual neglect to ill repute, to a gradual advancement towards the state of something of a national landscape these days. As the bog now often serves as a token of what tends to be framed, we might say, as pristine wilderness, which we know actually does not exist. Not in this country, not in Latvia, not anywhere in Earth, to be quite frank. So, and thus it also serves as a sales argument in Estonia's national and international tourist industry. You just need to take a look at international press. For instance, read The Guardian, and you will see, well, the mire, the swamp, and take your hike of wilderness in the Baltics. So probably you are familiar with this kind of discourse also in Latvia and Lithuania. So actually, this is not that surprising, as 22% of Estonia's surface is covered in peatlands, which makes Estonia rank second in the world after Finland, in which the percentage is 31. But again, to be honest, only a quarter of this land is really alive and functional today, in the sense of peat still being formed there, in the sense of these being live bogs. But also, now speaking history, some bogs in Estonia can be as old as 11,000 years. So they indeed do serve as witnesses of the past in what is now approaching the terms of deep time. We really can get very deep and dig very deep into our history. For instance, studying the pollen preserved in the bogs. However, now to the presence of the mire in literature. These days, it is a given. In recent Estonian poetry, you may find tropes, you may find images related to wetlands galore. And similarly, well, it has become a favorite backdrop for folk horror, for fantasy works. For instance, The Lost Tribe by Mehis Heinsaar, well, a very recent award-winning novel from 2023. Well, this year's cover art to a comprehensive fantasy anthology that, by the way, places a monster from a 19th century tale into a bog landscape, which is not actually mentioned in the tale, but it's viewed to be a suitable background in which such mythological, fantastic events might evolve. So we might ask the question, how have we got here? When did the Maya become a literary landscape that is able to engage a broad audience? As you know, our national epic Kalevi poem actually does not have the Maya as a popular setting, although it does contain some marginal sprites who are arguing between themselves. Nor does the Maya emerge as a particularly enticing or adventurous location in our extensive corpus of folk songs. So, how? Now, when Estonian realist fiction emerged in the 19th century, the work's literary significance lied in its being a social marker of poverty and desolation, as poor, bad, useless land that made the people connected with Mayas also deserving of contempt by extension. And now a vivid example derives from Juhan Liiv's novella The Shadow from 1894, well, a chrestomatic work studied at school. This starts with a depiction of what is then virtually a pauper settlement close to Lake Peipsi. And it's, well, significantly situated beside a bog. What Liiv says is the following. Well, and this is now the bog. The peasant will not have it, particularly the poor peasant from Nurmeküla. No. Neither does the manor really know what to do with it. It is really fit for one single thing. This is testified by various bleached bones of horses, cattle, dogs, and cats that lie around on the ground. Whenever one of such animals dies, be it by sickness, weariness, or an arrow, it is considered most appropriate to cast the body there. And in the end, he summarizes it. Upon it, that is the Maya, nature has bestowed precisely nothing, neither beauty nor fertility. So it's a rather straightforward denouncement. But a break to this non-appreciation of the Maya was due to arrive, though. And this would happen with the Young Estonia movement in the early 20th century. That has been deemed the most significant phenomenon on the Estonian cultural scene of the time. Now, this movement comprised a number of young figures of culture who gathered to form an, we might say, interventionist cultural political group that aimed at transforming Estonian culture and society in the wake of the revolutionary mentality of and post-1905. And their endeavors were associated with the slogan, well, that now resonates with our keynote, let us remain Estonians, but also become Europeans. That appeared in the poet Gustav Suits's programmatic introduction to the movement's eponymous first album that appeared in 1905, can be seen in the left upper hand corner. Many of the impulses of the Young Estonians were drawn from Finland, where several of the members actually lived and or studied for a while. And their most prominent woman member, Aido Kallas, actually came from Finland. The Young Estonia movement signaled the beginnings of contemporary Estonian urban culture, as well as modernism and neo-romanticism prevailing over realism in literature, as the Estonian Literary Museum helpfully points out. So, strictly speaking, the active years of the movement lasted from 1905 to 1915. During this period, the movement's 5 albums appeared that can be now seen on the slide. And it is in these collections that you can witness the transformation of the literary representations of the Maya, now against the backdrop of an evolution from earlier realist tendencies, now represented by, for instance, Liiv, as you see, via national romanticism towards symbolism and modernistic emphasis. Now, looking back at the end of this period, another prominent Young Estonian, Friedebert Douglas, and well, some more unbearded but moustached gentleman here. Douglas remarked, not in a particularly humble way, as you will notice, we met a literature of clay. We cannot say that we'll be leaving it behind, fashioned in marble, yet it is still something completely different from what it used to be. We have equipped it with more valuable substances, more sophisticated forms. We have taught it architectonic laws. We have, on our part, refined and ennobled the facade of Estonian intellectual life. So this is how they themselves saw their achievement, and basically, I think later literary historians do not exactly argue against this. But to the topic of the Maya. When they started off, their first album contained several texts still emphasizing the Borg as a socially meaningful landscape in a predominantly realist framework, with the necessary associations with poverty, social injustice. Several texts represented a very pragmatic take on wetlands that actually resonates with, I think, many of the environmentalist debates in our country today. Well, you cannot profit from these. They do not serve as places where you could grow timber. Basically, you will either die there as a worthless, declassed being, or at best you can dream of fertile fields, lush meadows, instead of your muddy mires. But there is an additional function emerging in some texts with a more historical slant, which is using the Borg as a refuge for fugitives. So if we initially have this, it can also be used by those fleeing from the injustice of the manor, or sheep thieves who are carrying their caught animals, or then mentally disturbed individuals. So the Maya can give refuge to the oppressed, the wronged, as well as the criminal, well, generally the different, the other. And this notion of hiding will lead us to another type of the literary Maya, that is the liminal, mystical, mythological space. And now this type is powerfully represented by Friedebert Douglass's long short story, his novella, The Island of God, a fairy tale from the Torgla Maya that appeared in the second album in 1907. And here the Maya hides something ancient. Another reality of pagan gods trickles down into it. It is not governed by rent to be paid to the manor or prices of timber. So, to quote, Torgla lived its vast and deep life, as mysterious and obscure as itself. And it contains an eternal struggle, birth and death. Alone stands the island of God, cut off from the firm land, in the middle of thick forests and sludgy swamps. The blue tops of its oaks can be seen from the bank, but no road will take you there. Only black posts stand in the deep mire between tiny pines, and it is along the tops of these that the way winds towards the Isle of God. But there is no one who knows the way. They rest in the ground. The skulls of some lie white on the banks of Douglas bog pools, and the wolves have scattered their bones. So, in 1965, Douglas himself commented on the birth of the novella in retrospect, saying that at Christmas time, 1904, he was reading Vladimir Gorolenko's short story, Les Shumit, that took over his imagination. He also drew on his childhood memories from the countryside spent in South Estonia, at Ahja, his father's tales about his grandfather, a forest keeper, and blended these with the romantic revolutionary moods that were in the air. And from this later perspective, he explicitly points out that he thinks he was the first in Estonian literature unconsciously to use the motif of the Maya that others, for instance Suits, would later employ consciously. He also noted that it was writing this work that transformed him from a realist into a romanticist. Well, obvious from the quote, isn't it? And I believe that it is here that the motif of this supernatural and mystical element of the Maya appears that has resurged in today's folk horror. However, Douglas also recalled that the revolutionary fire of 1905 was reflected in the burning of Torgla Borg in his novella. So the Maya also appeared as a symbol of a society that could be consumed by it. But the person who did the most to cement the Maya symbol into Estonian literature was the poet Gustav Suits, as Douglas also mentioned later, and whose work, I suppose, has been treated together with Rainis's in Latvia. His poetic bogs also have a social significance, yet not by contiguity, not in a metonymic way, not because of being settled by poor people, but metaphorically. In the poem Pools in the Swamp, Suits writes, roughly translated and kind of interlinear translation, that the lap of bogs is full of pools so deep. Is this the rusty water in them that is so dark and speechless? Or does pain look from under the ground, so black, so mindless? Also in the same poem, he has innumerable mosquitoes swarming about the swamps, yet also entering human hearts. So on the one hand, you have an image deriving from kind of unflinching embodied reality, the feeling, the experience. But on the other hand, this metaphorically represents a surrounding, pestering suffocation that one cannot escape from. Now, this landscape, this bog landscape, of course, is one of an anguished mindset, but not yet necessarily and explicitly Estonian one. But Suits also has another poem entitled Song About Estonia that appeared in the 4th album. And here he is explicit. He speaks of history as horrid as a curse, a trampled down, powerless breed, warped, humped bog birches, rooted and rootless in the mud of the mire. This is Estonia. So Suits actually does launch the mire in the function of a national landscape, but of course it's a far cry from the interesting image that we can see today. And another Young Estonia member, Aino Kallas, who we already mentioned, a Finnish lady married to an Estonian, suggests in her article Gustav Suits as a lyricist in the 5th album that it is, in such poems that the Estonian landscape, the Estonian soul, she uses them in parallel, acquires ever more distinct outlines, next to a growing patriotic pessimism. Now, the literary critic Herbert Salu, later exiled to Sweden, pointed out that parallels to such a metaphorical description of society as a mire also, of course, occur internationally. For instance, in Romain Rolland, who already was mentioned in the keynote, in works such as the novel Jean-Christophe or his Life of Beethoven. So embracing such a national evaluation actually did make Estonia more European. And Suits, by the way, also used mire images in his translations of Verlaine, in which, if Verlaine mentions pools, he might call them bog pools. But in Young Estonian days, Suits may have engaged with the atmosphere reigning during the Tsarist regime. However, later Estonian manifesto, the so-called Tarapita movement from the independent Estonia, 1921, calls also the newly established bourgeois order of the independent state a bog. This was compiled by an ex-Young Estonian, later June communist, Johannes Semper, signed, by the way, among others by Suits and Douglas. And now this imagery will also travel in time, basically to more political, propagandistic discourses. And now coming towards the end, then there is also, of course, the general societal despair. There are also personal metaphoric bogs appearing in the Young Estonia albums, totally detached from any natural landscapes, only magnifying characters' rather sordid states of mind. For instance, in case of Eduard Wilde in the 4th album. If the critic Kaja Sisaskas pointed out that in the case of Young Estonia, there are 3 partly overlapping spheres of main topics and themes that can be detected. These are aestheticism, mystical and nature-centered symbolism, and finally, sinful and culture-centered decadence. These personal mires now firmly belong to this latter category. But even the mystical, the symbolic settings need not be devoid of their representational credibility. When Douglas described his Torgla, it was also obvious that he actually was familiar with this type of landscape, not inventing it. The albums display also intense sensory experiences of natural setting that testify to the author's adequate environmental knowledge. So, to wind it up, we might then take a look at the typology launched then by the texts by Young Estonians as concerns the mire. We can see where they have led to. Those marked in bold are particularly salient, innovative in this period 100 years ago, or then are trending today. The Maya is a socially significant landscape, and from here we can proceed to the melioration novel, our kind of great national opus magnum by Anton Hansen Tammsaare, Truth and Justice, but also, although governed by a totally different ideology and philosophy, the Stalinist hey-ho melioration work by Hans Leberecht. Then the Maya as a mythological liminal space, well, a new introduction and totally popular, currently really trending. But also leading towards folk horror to follow in the 20s, for instance, by August Geilit, to poetry, for instance, by Maria Under, so kind of dispersed throughout Estonian literature, re-emerging during different decades. Then the Maya as an image, a symbol for the whole nation. Well, there is the international tradition, the Tarapita, as you could see, and also the Stalinist plan. Well, the description of your ideological enemy as a Maya in which you can drown is something that Herbert Salu pointed out, valid internationally. And finally, the Maya as indeed a perceptively observed natural landscape and ecosystem has led us to our today's nature writing, I believe. And I haven't been able to kind of prove it as yet. It should be possible by covering the text by such eminent Estonian nature writers as Johannes Piiper and Gustav Põldmaa. But I suppose that this is actually something that is of special interest to those of us interested in eco-criticism, and that also kind of justifies my being present here at this conference. Thank you.